The fight started over a food ration point. Two crewmates, one Helvari and one Droon, had been arguing since breakfast. By midday, they were in the corridor outside the lower maintenance bay, with their fists up and a crowd forming around them. Someone had already sent a message to Commander Osei's office. Someone else was taking bets. Rowan Hale walked out of the maintenance bay with a wrench in his hand and grease on his forearm. He looked at the two crewmates. He looked at the crowd. Then he walked between the two fighters, sat down on the floor, crossed his legs, and placed the wrench in his lap. Both fighters stared at him. The Helvari said something in his own language that translated roughly to "What are you doing?" Rowan said, "I'm sitting. You two can keep going if you want, but you'll have to step over me first." Nobody stepped over him. The crowd went quiet. After about 4 minutes of total silence, the Droon made a disgusted sound, turned around, and walked away. The Helvari stood there another 30 seconds, then followed. The crowd broke up, half of them shaking their heads. Nico Brell, Rowan's bunkmate, a broad-shouldered man from Cape Town with a loud laugh and a louder opinion about everything, reached down and helped Rowan off the floor. "You know," Nico said, "most people would have just let them fight. Most people," Rowan said, brushing dust off his uniform, "weren't raised with 5 siblings in 2 rooms." Nico laughed, but the laugh had something uneasy in it. He had known Rowan for 8 months aboard Galactic Peacekeeping Station Ardenshore, and he still had not figured out what to do with him. Rowan was not stupid. He was not weak in the physical sense. He was simply bafflingly and almost aggressively calm that IT made people uncomfortable. Peacekeeping stations attracted people who believed in force as a first language. Rowan seemed to have learned a different one. He had grown up on a farm outside a small town in the highlands of northern England where the soil was thin and the weather did not care about your plans. His parents grew vegetables and kept animals, and every year at least one of those animals got sick and needed someone to sit with it through the worst of it. That job usually fell to Rowan because he was the youngest and because he was, according to his mother, the only one with the patience for it. He had sat with dying sheep and feverish dogs and a calf once that spent 3 days unsure if it wanted to live. He had learned that pain made things dangerous not because they were evil, but because they were afraid. He had learned that stillness communicated something that shouting never could. He carried that with him into space. That IT did not make him popular. He heard the announcement about the Virati on the same afternoon as everyone else. Commander Dura Osei's voice came over the station calm, level and careful, as it always was. The creature in Holding Base 7 had injured its 3rd handler. The wounds were serious, but not fatal. The station was officially requesting volunteers for temporary handler duty until a specialist could be transferred in from the council's facilities, estimated arrival 3 weeks. The mess hall went very quiet. Then someone laughed. Then several people laughed. Nobody volunteered. Rowan knew about Sereth. Everyone did. It had been captured 8 months ago during a salvage operation near a dead system, found in the wreckage of a ship from a civilization that no longer existed. The Virati had been bred as war beasts by that civilization, enormous creatures, part reptile, part something with no Earth equivalent, built for loyalty and combat. Without their bonded handlers, the ones who created them, every Virati ever recovered had been classified as irretrievably feral. Sereth had killed one researcher and put 2 handlers in the medical bay. The current handler had lasted longer than most, nearly a month, before losing 2 fingers to a bite that Sereth had apparently delivered without any visible warning. Rowan went to the commander's office that evening and put his name on the volunteer list. Commander Osei looked at the paper. She looked at him. She was a tall woman with close-cropped gray hair and the kind of face that had seen a great many things and chosen to remain unreadable about most of them. "Your maintenance," she said. "Yes, ma'am. You have no handler training." "No, ma'am." She studied him for a moment. "Do you have a reason, Hale? Or is this something I should flag for a psych evaluation?" Rowan thought about it. "I heard it keening last night," he said, through the ventilation. "Everyone else heard aggression. I heard something different." Osei looked at him for a long time. Then she signed the paper. He spent that night in the archive room with Archivist Olan, a small elderly Cathali with silver eyes and ink-stained fingers. who had the only existing record of variety behavioral biology. By the time Rowan left, he had 3 pages of notes and a clearer picture of what Sereth was. Not a monster. Something built to bond with one person, living without that person for longer than anyone had thought to calculate. But he stood outside the sealed door of Holding Bay 7 the next morning. Nico stood 10 feet behind him, arms crossed, expression caught somewhere between concern and disbelief. From inside the bay came a low sound, long and falling. Not a roar. Rowan recognized it. He had heard something like it before from a calf in the dark a long time ago. He picked up the entry request panel and pressed his ID to it. The door began to open. The door opened and the smell hit him first, something old and animal and sharp, like iron left out in rain. The holding bay was large, much larger than Rowan expected, with high ceilings and reinforced walls and a floor scored with deep claw marks that went in every direction. Strip lighting ran along the ceiling, but 2 of the panels had been shattered, so the far end of the bay lived in half shadow. Sereth was in that shadow. Rowan could see the outline. Enormous. Longer than a transport vehicle, lower to the ground than he had imagined, with a spine that rose into a ridge of dark scale plates along its back. He could see the slow movement of its sides as it breathed. He could see the faint amber glow of its eyes, fixed on him. That he took 1 step inside. The door sealed behind him with a sound like a held breath. That he had brought no shock rod, no containment device. He had a cloth bag with a portion of the high-protein feed the station used for the creature, and a folded square of notes from Olan's archive tucked into his breast pocket. Sereth moved at Tea came out of the shadow fast, faster than something that size had any right to move, all muscle and scale, and a sound rising in its chest that Rowan felt in his back teeth. He had 1 second to make a decision, and his body made it before his mind caught up. He sat down on the floor, not crouching, not bracing. He sat cross-legged on the scored floor the same way he had sat between 2 fighting crewmates the day before. Sereth stopped. It stopped so close that Rowan could see the individual scale plates around its jaw, each one edged faintly in amber. Its breath came in hot waves. Its eyes were fixed on him with an intensity that had no name in any human language. Rowan knew that he did not look away. He did not look directly either, keeping his gaze slightly to the side, the way Olan's notes said a variety would read, as non-threatening. Present but not challenging. Then he started talking. Not anything important, not anything planned. He talked the way he used to talk to sick animals on the farm, a low and even sound filling the silence, because silence in those situations had always felt worse than words. He talked about the highland weather, about his mother's bread that never quite rose properly at altitude, about the sound the wind made coming off the hills before a hard frost. He talked without expecting anything back. He just did not want the bay to be quiet. Sereth did not move. After a long time, maybe 10 minutes, the creature's breathing slowed. The sound in its chest faded. It stayed where it was, close enough that Rowan could have reached out and touched the edge of its jaw. But it stayed. Rowan opened the cloth bag and set the food portion on the floor in front of him. He did not push it forward. He just placed it there. He kept talking. Sereth looked at the food, looked at Rowan, looked at the food again. Then it turned and moved back to the far end of the bay, into the shadow, and laid down facing him. It did not eat the food, but it did not attack. Rowan sat there for the rest of his shift. When the door opened again and Nico's voice came through the external speaker asking if he was alive, Rowan stood up slowly, joints aching from the floor. His hands were trembling. He had not let them do that while he was inside. He stepped out of the bay and Nico grabbed his arm and looked him over with wide eyes. "Are you hurt?" "No." "It didn't touch you?" "No." Nico stared at the sealed door, then at Rowan, then at the door again. "What did you do?" Rowan thought about it. "I just stayed." He said he went back the next day. And the day after that, the progress was not clean. Sereth ignored him on the second day entirely, turning its back and pressing its head against the far wall in a way that Olan later told him was a stress posture, the equivalent of shutting your eyes and wishing something away. On the third day, it charged twice and stopped itself both times, pulling up short and making a low sound that was different from the first one, shorter and frustrated. Rowan sat through all of it. On the fourth day, the food was gone when he arrived. He stood there looking at the empty space on the floor and felt something ease in his chest. He pulled out a fresh portion from the bag. He sat down. Sareth watched from the shadow, amber eyes catching the light. Rowan placed the food on the floor and started talking about the farm again. We did not know yet. What he would only understand much later when Olan explained it to him was that Sareth had not eaten the food while Rowan was there, because taking food in front of someone was a variety gesture of trust. The creature had waited until it was alone. It was not ready yet, but it was thinking about it. In the station's monitoring room, 2 decks up, Commander Osei watched the footage with her arms crossed and said nothing. Beside her, a communication had just come in from Counselor Yevisorn of the Galactic Council Security Division, requesting a full report on the Variety situation. Osei filed the report. She kept the footage of Rowan sitting on the floor out of it. She was not sure why. She filed that instinct away too. Archivist Olan had a habit of making tea he never drank. Every time Rowan visited the archive room, there was a cup steaming on the desk beside the old Cathali's elbow, and every time Rowan left, the cup was still there, full and cold. Olan did not seem to notice. His attention lived entirely in his documents. The Variety do not have a spoken language, Olan said one evening, pulling a brittle folded sheet from a sealed drawer. Not in the way we mean it. They communicate through movement, posture, specific physical arrangements of the body that carry precise meaning. He spread the sheet on the table. It showed detailed diagrams of a creature that looked like Sareth, with lines indicating angle of spine, position of crest plates, angle of the jaw. Their creators spent 200 years learning to read it. Rowan looked at the diagrams. And then they were gone. And then they were gone. Olan agreed. And every Variety left alive lost the only beings who understood them. He tapped one of the diagrams. This one, crest plates flat, chin lowered, weight shifted to the back legs. This means recognition. This is what a Variety does when it sees its handler. Rowan copied it into his notes. He had started carrying a small notebook. It was already half full that he tried the recognition posture the next morning. He felt deeply foolish doing it, standing just inside the bay door with his chin dropped and his shoulder pressed back, but he held it. Sareth, who had been pacing, went still. It turned its full attention to him. Then it made a sound Rowan had not heard before, low and long and smooth, like something exhaled rather than voice. He ran the sound recording to Olan that afternoon. The old archivist listened with his eyes closed. That, Olan said quietly, is a bonding vocalization. The Variety's creators described it as the sound of being remembered. Rowan sat with that for a while. Back on the station's main deck, the conversation about him had shifted. It was no longer entirely mockery. The crew had access to the basic monitoring feed, and they had watched Sareth go still for him repeatedly now. They had watched the food disappear. They still thought he was strange, but strange had started to mean something different. It meant something they did not have a category for yet. Nico came to find him one evening while Rowan was writing up his notes at a corner table in the mess. "Teach me one," Nico said. He sat down without asking and nodded at the notebook. "One of the gestures. The ones you do." Rowan looked at him. Nico spread his hands. "I'm not taking anything. I just want to understand what I'm watching." So Rowan showed him the non-threatening posture, gaze angled slightly aside, shoulders open, no sudden movements. Nico practiced it with an expression of extreme seriousness, as if he were learning something technical rather than something small and quiet, which in a way he was. "Why does it work?" Nico asked. "Because it says the same thing in every language," Rowan said. "I'm not coming at you. I see you. I'm still here." Nico nodded slowly. He did not make any jokes. It was the first conversation they had ever had that felt like two people talking rather than one person explaining themselves to someone who had already decided what he was. 2 decks up, something else was happening. Counselor Yevisorn had not been satisfied with Osei's report. She had filed a formal inquiry with the station's security board citing unresolved risk concerns regarding the Variety, and she had done it under a provision that gave her office authority to request additional documentation within 72 hours. What she was building toward, Commander Osei understood clearly, was a case for transfer. Not to another handler, to a research facility, the kind whose records were classified and whose outputs were not discussed in open council. Osei pushed back where she could, citing active progress, citing the absence of any incident since Rowan took over. Soren's office responded that the absence of incident was precisely what concerned them. Osei sat with that message for a long time. She understood what Soren was actually afraid of. A variety that followed orders had military value. A variety that followed a human's orders had political implications that Counselor Soren was not ready to see resolved in humanity's favor. Rowan did not know any of this yet. What Rowan knew was that on the 12th day, Sereth ate the food while he was still in the room. That it was not dramatic. The creature simply lowered its head, picked up the food portion, and ate. Then it looked at Rowan with those amber eyes and made the exhaled sound again. Rowan sat very still and felt something catch his throat that he did not want to examine too closely in a room full of cameras. After his shift, he went to the transparent barrier section of the base secondary wall, the observation panel the previous handlers had used to monitor from outside. He pressed his palm flat against it. Sereth moved to the other side and pressed its head against the barrier. The glass was cold. Through it, the creature's warmth was faint but there. Rowan stood like that for a while. Just standing to it was Nico, passing through the corridor, who saw it. He stopped. He looked at the enormous creature with its head against the glass and the maintenance worker from northern England with his hand on the other side, and he stood there without saying anything until Rowan turned around. Nico looked like he was working out what words were supposed to go here. He settled on, "I'll cover your morning maintenance report tomorrow." Rowan nodded. "Thanks." That was enough. The form was 4 pages long and written in the kind of language that seemed designed to discourage people from filing it. Rowan filled it out at the desk in his bunk room, while Nico slept on the top bunk and occasionally muttered things at the ceiling in his sleep. The form was a petition under the old compact, a clause buried in Galactic peacekeeping charter that predated the current council by roughly 4 centuries. It granted formal handler status to any individual who could demonstrate an established behavioral bond with a classified creature, and it granted that para-protected legal designation that was very difficult to override. Olan had found it. He had brought it to Rowan with both hands. The way people carry things they know are fragile. Commander Osei read the completed petition the next morning without changing her expression. Then she looked up at Rowan, standing on the other side of her desk. "You understand what this means," she said. "Yes, ma'am. If Sereth injures anyone from this point forward, the responsibility sits with you. If you're harmed, the council will have grounds to terminate the creature immediately." She set the form down. "I cannot protect you from either outcome." "I know," Rowan said. She studied him the same way she had the first time he stood in this office, looking for the piece of this she was missing. She did not find it. She signed the petition. The energy barrier on holding Bay 7's entrance was deactivated that afternoon. Rowan had been in the bay many times now, but always with the barrier active, a secondary safety net humming invisibly between him and any sudden decision Sereth might make. Without it, the room felt larger, quieter. The air tasted different. He walked in and sat down in his usual spot. Sereth raised its head from the far end of the bay and watched him. Then it rose, all of it, the full weight and height of the creature unfolding from the ground, and Rowan made himself breathe evenly. He did the recognition posture. He kept his gaze at the non-challenging angle. He waited. Sereth crossed the B, a wide IT moved slowly this time. Not like the first day's charge, but step by step, each one deliberate, until it was close enough that Rowan could see the tiny variations in the scale plates around its jaw, the places where old scars had healed in lighter colors. It lowered its head. It sniffed him a long, slow breath that moved his hair, and then it exhaled the bonding sound directly at him, so close he felt the vibration of it in his chest. Then Sereth lay down, not near him, around him. The creature arranged itself in a loose curve, its body on 3 sides of where Rowan sat, its head resting on the floor at his left shoulder. Rowan sat inside the circle of it and looked at the far wall and did not let himself react because he was very aware of the cameras and he was a private person by nature. but he pressed the back of his hand gently against the side of Sereth's jaw where the scale plates were smooth, and Sereth made a sound like something finally letting go of a breath it had been holding for years. In the monitoring room, Commander Osei watched the feed and did not say a word. Behind her stood 4 members of the crew who had drifted in one by one over the past 10 minutes and now occupied the back wall. In total silence, one of them was Nico. He had both arms crossed and was looking at the ceiling in a way that had nothing to do with the ceiling in the mess hall, where the feed was also displayed on a corner screen. Someone turned the volume up and the room went quiet around it. The petition was logged with the Galactic Peacekeeping Registry that evening. By the following morning, Counselor Soren's office had flagged it. Her response arrived in Commander Osei's inbox 12 hours later, formal and clipped. The old compact provision had not been invoked in over a century. Soren's office was requesting a review of whether it still applied under current charter law. Pending that review, she was pushing for an inspection team to be sent to Arden Shore, an inspection team with authority to recommend action. Osei read the message twice. She knew what Soren was doing. The footage from the monitoring room was logged and accessible, and Soren's office would have seen it by now. A variety curled around a human handler was not a security risk in any normal sense. But it was something the Council had not authorized, and the Council did not like things it had not authorized. She forwarded the message to Rowan with one line of her own added at the bottom. IT said, "Be ready." Rowan read it sitting on the floor of the bay with Sereth's head a few inches from his knee. He folded the message, put it back in his pocket, and reached over to scratch gently at the edge of the jaw, plating in the spot he had learned, over 2 weeks of careful observation, that Sereth liked best. The creature made a low, contented sound that rolled through the floor. Rowan thought about his farm, about how the calf he had sat with for 3 days in the dark had eventually stood up, eaten, and gone on to live 4 more good years. About what his mother had said when he told her that story. She had said, "Patience is not weakness, love. It is just strength with better manners." That he had been 12 years old. He had not entirely understood it, then that he thought he understood it now. The inspection team arrived on a Tuesday, which felt appropriate to Rowan in a way he could not explain. Nothing good ever seemed to start on a Tuesday. There were 5 of them, 3 council security analysts, 1 medical officer, and Counselor Yeva Soren herself, who was taller than Rowan had imagined from the reports, and who walked through Arden Shore's docking corridor with the expression of someone who had already made up their mind and was here to collect evidence to support it. Commander Osei met them at the dock. She was polite. She was also the kind of polite that had iron underneath it. Rowan was not at the dock. He was in holding Base 7, sitting with Sereth the way he did every morning, talking about something he had read in Olan's archive a night before regarding old variety behavioral patterns. Sereth was listening with the focused attention it always gave him, amber eyes tracking the movement of his hands when he gestured. Rowan had noticed this early on, that Sereth was a creature that watched hands very carefully. He had started using his hands more when he talked, that he knew the inspection was happening. He had known for 3 days. He had decided the best thing he could do was be exactly where he always was, doing exactly what he always did. The inspection team came to the monitoring room first and watched the feed. Rowan saw the light change on the camera panel, which was how he knew they were there. He continued talking. Soren requested a live demonstration, which Commander Osei said she would arrange. What that meant in practice was the inspection team filing into the observation section outside the bay, behind the thick transparent panel, while Rowan stayed inside. He stood and did the recognition posture. Sereth responded with a bonding vocalization. He ran through a basic sequence, movements that Sereth recognized as a kind of conversation, the equivalent of checking in, and the creature responded to each one with the appropriate counter posture, patient and clear. Soren watched with her arms crossed. One of her security analysts had a small device in his coat pocket. Rowan did not see it. No one on the station had seen it come through the dock because it was shielded under a standard medical equipment clearance, one of several pieces of paperwork Soren's team had filed on arrival. The analyst activated the device at the 12-minute mark of the demonstration. The pain emitter's signal hit Sereth between one breath and the next. The creature went from still to explosive so fast that the first sound it made, A cracking shriek that Rowan felt in the back of his skull came at the same moment. The tail sweep hit the far wall, and the lighting panel above shattered. Sareth thrashed against the pane, spinning, snapping at nothing. The sound in its chest rising from controlled vocalizations to something that had no comment at all. The inspection team scrambled back from the observation panel. One of the analysts fell. Soren did not move. Rowan was already moving towards Sareth. There was no calculation in it. He did not stop to weigh the risk or make a plan. He moved toward the sound the same way he had always moved toward pain that needed company, steadily and without hesitation, and he got close enough that Sareth could see him through the frenzy, and he dropped into the recognition posture, low and clear, and he made the sound, not the bonding vocalization. He could not replicate that, but the sound he had found over weeks of trying, a low and even sound from the back of his throat, something between a hum and a held note, that Olon had told him roughly translated as "I am here." "I am not leaving." Sareth swung toward him, jaws open. Every muscle in the creature's body pulled toward violence by pain it did not understand. Rowan held the posture. He kept making the sound. Sareth stopped. The creature stood there trembling, every scale plate raised, chest heaving, the shriek dropping back to the chest sound, and then lower, lower, until it was just breathing. Hard and ragged, but breathing. It dropped its head. Its crest plates slowly flattened. Then it moved to Rowan and pressed its jaw against his shoulder and made the long, exhaled sound of recognition, quiet and exhausted. Rowan put both arms against the side of its head and stayed there. The bay was very quiet in the observation section. Nobody spoke for a long time. Then Commander Osei said, "Find the device." It took 6 minutes. The analyst who had activated it was still holding it, which Osei said was either very stupid or evidence that he had not expected things to end the way they did. She had him and 3 others in her conference room within the hour. Soren stated that she had no knowledge of the device, which Osei accepted with the same polite iron she had been using all morning. What Soren could not control was what the station's monitoring system had logged. The timing of the signal, the device's frequency, the analyst's position in the room at the moment of activation. It was all there, quietly recording the way monitoring systems do. Rowan did not attend the conference. He stayed in the bay until Sareth's breathing was steady and the creature had eaten and settled. Then he sat against its side and let his hands stop shaking where no camera could clearly see them. Outside the door, Nico sat down on the corridor floor with his back against the wall, not saying anything, just being nearby, which was its own kind of language. The hearing was held by holocom, which meant 12 council members appeared as translucent figures around a circular table in Ardenshore's main conference room, while Rowan sat in a chair in the middle, and the room felt very large. Soren was present in person, the only council member who had not returned to the relay network. She sat at the edge of the room with her hands folded and her face arranged into something neutral. The lead counselor, a broad-shouldered Avari named Drell, opened the session by reading the charges on the table, which were technically not charges but recommendations. The recommendation was that the bond between Rowan Hale and the Varadi designated Sareth be formally dissolved. Rowan would be transferred. Sareth would be sent to a facility appropriate to its classification. The reason given was that a bonded Varadi human pair represented an unauthorized military capability, and humanity had not been cleared for access to such a capability. Drell asked Rowan if he understood the recommendation. Rowan said yes. Drell asked if he wished to respond. Rowan said yes to that too. He had not prepared anything. Nico had offered to help him write a speech, and Rowan had declined. Not because he did not appreciate it, but because he did not think a speech was what was needed here. He told them about the calf. He talked about being 7 years old on a hill farm in England where nothing grew easily and nothing came without work, and how there had been a calf one winter that had come into the world wrong and spent 3 days deciding whether to stay in it. He said he had sat with it in the dark of the barn for all 3 of those days because his mother told him something that lived alone in its pain usually chose to stop living. But something that knew another creature was there sometimes chose differently. He said the calf had stood up on the morning of the 4th day. He said he had not understood, when he came into this bay 3 weeks ago, that Sareth was doing the same thing the calf had been doing. Not raging, deciding. That every creature the station had sent in before him had sent the same message, that this creature's pain was dangerous and should be controlled with force. And that Sareth had responded the only way something responds to that message, with more of the same. That he said he had not done anything remarkable. He had just sent a different message. That he said, I don't know what your rules say about what I'm allowed to have, but I know what happens to a living thing when you tell it that it is only a weapon and nothing else. I've sat with enough of them to know. He stopped there. The room was quiet. Then Archivist Olan, who had been given 3 minutes to speak, submitted his records. 2 centuries of historical documentation on the last known bonded Varadi handler pair. Their service record. The number of conflicts they had resolved without violence. The formal peacekeeping commendations they had received. 0 incidents of unauthorized aggression in 217 years. Commander Osei gave her testimony without notes. She described 3 specific situations in the past 3 weeks where Sareth's calming response to Rowan's presence had prevented crew incidents that her security projections had flagged as high risk. She described the inspection incident in precise operational language and stated clearly that the pain emitter had been brought onto her station without declaration and activated without authorization. Then Nico's petition was entered into the record. It had signatures from 41 crew members. Nico was not a man who did things quietly when he decided to do them. Rowan had not known about it until that morning. Counselor Soren made her case. She was precise and controlled, and she made reasonable-sounding points about oversight and classified designations and the importance of established process. She was good at it. She had clearly done it many times before. Counselor Drell called for a closed vote. The result came back in 11 minutes. The bond stood. Rowan was formally designated a Galactic Compact Handler, the first human being to hold the title in the history of the registry. His station posting was to be reviewed for a role change appropriate to the designation. Sareth was reclassified from a classified threat asset to a bonded peacekeeping creature under the old Compact's protections. Soren left the conference room without speaking to anyone. Rowan went directly to the bay. He sat in his usual spot on the scored floor. Sareth crossed to him immediately and lowered its head, and he pressed his forehead against the side of the creature's jaw, and they stayed like that for a while. Olan came by later, which surprised Rowan since the old archivist rarely left his room. He stood at the bay entrance and looked at the 2 of them with his silver eyes and said, I found one more thing in the old records. Rowan looked up. The creators of the Varadi had a word for the handler. Olan said, a specific word, different from the words for soldier or keeper or caretaker. He paused. It translates most closely as the one who stayed. Sareth made the bonding sound, low and long, the exhaled sound of being remembered. Rowan scratched gently at the jaw, plating in the spot the creature liked, and looked out at the stars through the bay's single-high window. The galaxy had many words for strength. Across 1,000 species and 1,000 years of recorded history, it had named strength as size and speed and firepower and political leverage, and the willingness to be the last one standing. It was learning, slowly, that soft was one of them.